The morning woke like a held breath finally released. Mist lay low over the city, ribboning the streets, softening the hospital's sharp edges. Pigeons angled through it like slow thoughts. In the square, vendors unfolded tables the way people unfold their courage, hesitant at first, then with both hands. Elara arrived before the bells. Memory and form flanked her, quiet and watchful, as if escorting a word into a room where it needed to be heard. They had chalk, they had bread, they had a circle. Elara knelt and drew the first line, not perfectly, deliberately not perfectly, so a child could see there was room to join. Form adjusted the curve with 2 fingers. Memory hummed a note that made sparrows hop closer along the stone. When the bell finally rang, people came in 2s and 3s, drawn by curiosity, by the rumor of a story returning, by the ache they could no longer deny. Nurses with night shift eyes, a mason with hands that remembered walls they never wanted to build again, a teenager holding a cracked phone like a rosary, a woman with a scarf wrapped twice around her head, the way you wrap a wound you can't show. Elara stood at the circle's edge. "There is nothing to sell here," she said softly. "Only a place to breathe. Sit if you want, stand if you must. If you need to cry, the stones can take it. If you need to be silent, the wind will hold it. And if you need to speak, we'll make room." Some sat, some pretended not to look. Some hovered with the alertness of animals who survived winters other people didn't notice. A boy in a school jumper asked, "What is it?" "A listening," Elara said, "and a remembering." He frowned in the perfect honesty of 11. "Of what?" "Of the fact that we belong to one another," Memory answered, "even when it hurts." The silence arrived late, as it always did, never as absence, but as a clever, twisting presence that pressed on the inner ear. It moved through the square like a cold logic, offering the more efficient path. Keep moving, keep buying, don't look down at the ache, pain is private, breath is indulgence, circles are childish. A woman with a clipboard walked straight through the chalk line and smudged it under heel. She didn't notice. She had a quota for signatures and a script that paid per hour. When Elara stepped to redraw the arc, the woman glanced up, startled, then embarrassed, then defensive. The 3 faces the silence prefers. "It's just chalk," she said. Elara smiled gently. "Yes." "Exactly. Would you like to sit?" The woman considered the offer the way a trapped animal considers a door. Then she shook her head and hurried on, leaving the faintest lemon-colored scent of cheap stress perfume behind her, like the afterthought of a blossom. Not everyone refused. A few sat. The teenager with the cracked phone sat cross-legged and didn't look at anyone. The mason sat as if the earth were an old friend. The nurse sat but kept her bag on her lap like armor. Form placed a single loaf of bread in the center. "Ordinary things," he said, almost to himself. "The loom," Elara began. "Name one small thing you forgot to love this week," she said. Silence, this time the good kind, settled like a shawl. Then, from somewhere on the far side of the circle, warm water. Another voice, "My own feet." The nurse's mouth twitched. "Breakfast," she said. "When I had it, when I didn't." Laughter, tender, not at anyone, moved around like a cat deciding who to sit with. The boy leaned forward. "My little brother snores like a hedgehog," he said, delighted. And because they had begun to name the small, the large could arrive without breaking them. A bearded man with the kind of eyes that looked tired in sunlight said, "I'm 3 months clean." He said it like a confession and a miracle. The teenager looked up. The woman with the scarf said very softly, "I am going to the clinic." They said to come back in 2 weeks for the results. The nurse shifted, her body remembering its training, then remembering it was here to be a person first. "Do you want someone to go with you?" she asked. The woman's eyes filled in the irreducible way eyes fill. She nodded. The circle adjusted like a living thing, making room for a sprout. Elara felt the lattice register every answer. Threads brightened where hands almost touched. The city's grid, so proud of its angles, softened, allowing roundness to move through like rain. Then, the silence tested them. A man stumbled into the square with a camera fixed to a black stabilizer. He spoke fast, too fast, in the performative cadence you learn when you need views to pay rent. "We're doing a social experiment," he announced. "Can strangers fix your life in 60 seconds? Tell us your worst problem. The internet will decide," the boy laughed nervously. A few people looked at their shoes. The bearded man flinched in a way you don't see unless you've spent nights in rooms with no clocks. Elara stepped toward the lens the way you step toward a small fire running the wrong direction. "Not today," she said. The man's grin faltered. "Freedom of speech?" "Freedom of listening," Memory returned, her tone soft enough to lift pollen. "Content," the man bargained, as if that were a virtue. "Contact," Elara answered, and held the man's gaze until his shoulders remembered their weight. He blinked, looked suddenly young, and muttered, "Sorry," as he backed away. The circle exhaled. Form lifted the loaf, broke it, and handed pieces outward without ceremony. People eat differently when they have been seen. The first chew is shy, the second is grateful. The third tastes like a childhood kitchen you didn't know you missed. Across the square, the hospital's doors hissed open. A gurney whisked past, two paramedics in crisp focus, steering a body packed in blankets and fear. The nurse half rose, sat again. Duty pulled one way, human pulled the other. "Go," Elara said gently. "We'll keep your seat warm." The nurse went, and in her wake, a dozen invisible threads tugged tighter. By midday, the circle had widened twice. People came on purpose now. A busker in a denim jacket tuned his guitar and then didn't play it. Instead, he listened with it in his lap like a cat. An old woman brought a thermos and set it by the bread, which had become not a loaf, but a practice. Elara stood, walked the line of chalk with her hand open to the air, and spoke in a voice only the lattice could hear. "If you are coming, come as breath. If you are warning, warn as light. If you are testing, test as weather that grows wheat." The answer was not a word, but a pressure, the way the sky feels before snow. Elara turned her head, certain the mirror in the trees could be seen even from here. For an instant, she swore the hospital's glass reflected not the square, but an orchard. Memory leaned in. "They're close," she said. "Closer than close," Form added. "But the other thing is too." The other thing arrived at dusk. It announced itself as doubt, as fatigue, as the rational voice of a childhood teacher who did not believe in singing in class. It hummed a countertone that made people misremember why they'd come. The bearded man shifted, anxious without an object. The teenager's phone lit with a notification. It always knew when to do that, and his shoulders closed like shutters. Lights in the buildings flickered. The guitar's A string slid flat. A dog barked twice toward nothing and then curled into itself, embarrassed. Elara felt it in her bones, not the old silence, which she had learned to hear through, but a sharpened version with teeth, amplified by the attention of 1,000 small screens and 100 exhausted hearts. The city's ache had attracted something hungry. Form's jaw tightened. "Distortion," he said. "It bends the geometry of meaning." Memory's eyes shone with tears that were not fear, but clarity. "We need a descent," she said. A thread taken into the maze. Elara knew what that meant. She looked at the people, at the nurse who had returned with hands washed to the wrists, at the boy who had made the teenager laugh by imitating a teacher's unfortunate sneeze, at the woman with the scarf who now held the nurse's arm the way a boat holds a pier. "I'll go," Elara said, "but I won't go alone." "You won't," Memory replied. "Take the ordinary, it travels best." Form placed in Elara's palm a small thing, a bakery token, brass and smooth from 1,000 thumbs. "For the door," he said. "And this," Memory added, tying the woman's scarf loosely around Elara's wrist with permission. "For the ones who wait for results." Elara nodded. "Guard the circle," she told them. "If I'm gone too long, sing." "Sing what?" the busker asked. "Anything that is true," Memory said. The hill was different at night, not darker, more awake. Trees breathed with the slow confidence of elder animals. The mirror stood between them, a ring of woven light and green, the color of shoots under soil long before anyone calls them spring. Elara touched the brass token to its edge. The geometry recognized the rightness of fingerprints. The surface loosened like water, remembering it isn't glass. She looked back at the city, at the far square where a faint circle of people could be seen as points of warmth, destitute and royal in the way all circles are. She stepped through. The first sensation was not wonder, but temperature. The air inside the mirror was the exact degree of warmth that makes a human body forget it is separate. The ground was there and not there. Walking felt like choosing. Light ran along threads like dew charged with decision. The ring closed behind her without closing, the way a mouth closes around a note to shape it but not stop it. Elara. The voice came from in front, above, behind, everywhere. The way rain says your name when you've been gone too long. Figures approached, their edges less like bodies than like ideas that had practiced being kind. As they neared, she saw the robes were made, indeed, of mathematics. A softness of proofs, a drape of ratios that could balance a planet. They were not many, they were enough. One carried the harp of living time, another held a bowl that reflected only what you could bear, a third wore no visible emblem at all, and yet seemed to be the horizon when the sea agrees to be patient. Architects, Elara breathed. Child of the mid-world, the horizon figure said, and there was humor, like spring in a formal garden. We have waited until you were ready to be read. Elara stood straighter. The city, she began, and then she couldn't continue because the images arrived too quickly. The nurse's hands, the teenager's brittle courage, the bearded man's calendar with all the days he did not use, the woman with the scarf, the busker's guitar, the circle like a heartbeat held in stone. The harpist plucked a single thread. The note carried the smell of bread and the sound of a mother saying a name she rarely got to say. Elara's bones answered before her brain. We see your circle, the horizon said. We also see the countersong, the distortion, Elara said. It feeds on attention, on speed, on the refusal to sit in a room where grief is allowed. So you will go where it feeds, the bowl-bearer said, not as a question. Elara swallowed. Into the places and people that hurt. Into the economy of loneliness, the horizon agreed. Into rooms where time is hoarded like wealth. Into the institutions that learn to inhale but not exhale. And you will not go as a conqueror, the harpist added. You will go as a tuning fork. Elara looked at her hands. They looked like her mother's today. She turned them over. The bakery token lay warm against her lifeline. The scarf around her wrist hummed the half-prayer of waiting rooms. What if I fail? She asked, simple as the first time a child says why without defense. Memory's voice answered, though memory was not there. Then you will have been with them, it said. And that is not a failure the lattice recognizes. The horizon lifted a hand. Threads in the distance arranged themselves the way schools of fish do when the ocean remembers it has choreography. A path opened, not straight, not easy, true. You will need 3 things, the bowl-bearer said. 1 you already have, the ordinary. The second we give you now, a measure. He set the bowl in her hands. It weighed exactly as much as admitting you are afraid. When she looked into it, she saw not her face, but the circles in the city. The market, yes, but also a round table in a cramped kitchen where 3 teenagers planned a kindness. A ring of nurses sharing tea, finally tapping the tea bag twice in the way that means, I'm here. A group on a bus who did not know they were a choir until the driver braked and everyone swayed together without falling. The third? Elara asked. The harpist smiled. You will borrow it from those you meet. It is called permission. The word caught in Elara's chest like a swallow caught and then released. She nodded. And the distortion, she said. How do I hold a field when it pulls people apart? The horizon spoke with both love and science. You do not grip the field. You host it, you set tables. You tie knots, you leave chairs empty on purpose. You let them take turns being the strong one. The bowl warmed, the scarf's green deepened like forests after rain. Go, the harpist said. Your circle is singing, Elara turned. The mirror's far surface brightened, the way the door of a home does when the kettle is already on. She stepped through. Night had laid its hand across the city. The square was smaller now, not fewer people, just closer together by choice. A low human sound held the air, not a formal song, but the kind people make when they are shaping breath into a raft. The distortion had learned, too. It curled around the circle with compliments that sounded like knives wrapped in velvet. You are naive, it crooned. You are wasting time. You are embarrassing yourselves. You are not fixing anything. The world is burning. Do you think humming will stop a war? Elara set the bowl at the circle's center. It reflected nothing until the busker leaned forward and saw his father teaching him a chord in a kitchen with a broken blind. He startled, smiled, and then didn't look away. The melody he played was the simplest thing he knew. It was enough. The bearded man saw his own hand putting a bottle down, and another hand, his, taking someone else's instead. He cried once, a private sound, then breathed like he'd been underwater and finally remembered the surface existed. The teenager saw a future he could stand in without pretending to be iron. He swore softly, which was his way of being reverent. The woman with the scarf saw a room with pale walls, a nurse with gentle eyes, a doctor who didn't rush the last sentence. She reached without looking and found the nurse's fingers waiting, palm up. Around the edges, the distortion hissed. It tried new shapes, sarcasm, efficiency, news alerts labeled urgent that were not. It tried a voice that sounded like a parent's worst day. It tried math that did not count the right things. Elara did not argue, she hosted. She showed the boy how to draw a smaller circle inside the bigger one for the ones who needed more boundary to feel safe. She asked the mason to mark 4 chalk lines like compass points so those who couldn't sit long could walk their prayers without leaving. She passed bread again and asked if anyone wanted to fold a slice for someone else later and put it in a pocket, because remembering sometimes needs crumbs. The circle thickened, not by number, but by trust. People told the truth, the way you return a borrowed book, carefully, grateful it still exists. "I am so tired of being strong," someone said. "Then be carried," someone else answered, and 4 people subtly shifted to surround her with ordinary presence, which is the only kind that works. Fireflies, city cousins, tiny drones, a trick of light, flickered above them, or maybe they were the little permissions leaving the bowl to find their address. Form stood at Elara's shoulder, measuring the night with the long tape of a tide. "The field holds," he said, relief and rigor sharing a room. Memory squeezed Elara's hand once. "There will be a price," she warned, soft as moss. "I know," Elara said. "We'll pay it in time and patience. We'll make smaller circles where the large one scares people. We'll make larger circles where the small one is too tight." The distortion thinned, frustrated by the lack of fight. It would return, of course it would, but the city now had furniture for it to bump into. A siren wailed. The nurse stood. "Go," Elara said again, and the circle opened to let her through like a pupil opening for light. Near midnight, when even the pigeons had the good manners to sleep, Elara felt a tug, not from the mirror, from below. She excused herself gently and followed the sensation down an alley whose walls were tattooed with names teenagers had given themselves so they would not be nameless. A door halfway along bore a sign that read, "Community Center," in a font designed to look friendly, and a lock designed by someone scared of people. Inside, a fluorescent thrum said "We tried," and the smell of mop water said "We are tired." In a side room, the city had gathered a second circle, unofficial and late. A man in a council badge argued into a phone about budgets. A grandmother negotiated with a vending machine that thought coins were a rumor. 2 girls practiced a dance in whisper feet. A mother rocked a pram in the ancient meter of heartbeats. 3 boys hovered at a doorway, the way fledglings hover at sky. At the back, a volunteer with kind shoes stacked chairs alone. Elara did not announce herself. She joined the stacking. The volunteer glanced at her, then nodded, as if to say, "Thank you for being a person in a room." "What do you need?" Elara asked. The volunteer looked at the pile of chairs. "An extra pair of hands," she said. Then, after a beat, "And someone to stay when the town leaves." Elara felt the lattice shift, threads rerouting to include this small, fluorescent miracle. "We can do that," she said, "but not with one set of shoulders." She lifted her voice, not loud, simply designed so ears could relax around it. "We are making a circle here," she said, not out of authority, but out of invitation. "Not the kind you sit in, the kind you schedule." Heads turned. "A rota," the councilman said, suspicious of anything that sounded like work without paperwork. "A ritual," Elara returned. "Same letters, different spine." The grandmother laughed. The boys straightened, alert to the possibility of being important. "Every night," Elara continued, "for as long as the remembering takes, this room will have 2 people in it. One who listens, one who holds doors. No speeches, no saving. T24 chairs. If there are more people than chairs, we make a second room. If there are fewer, we sing to the empty ones so they don't get lonely." "Who pays?" the councilman asked out of habit. "The ones who can," Elara said. "And when we can't, we pay with time, which is the original coin." The volunteer's eyes were wet now. "I can take Tuesdays." "I can take Tuesdays with you," the grandmother said. The boys looked at one another, the way young wolves do when someone mentions night watch. "We can take the late hours," one said, trying to sound casual. "We're up anyway." A rhythm began. names, nights, the sound of calendars forgiving themselves for being rigid. The vending machine accepted a coin. It dispensed 2 sodas, perhaps by accident, perhaps by gratitude. Elara left them building their rota ritual and felt the city's second circle click into the lattice like a well-cut stone. Outside, the air had the taste of 3 a.m., intimate and dangerous and full of possibility. The distortion was quiet for now, sulking in the corners where light has not yet learned the names of things. At the hill, the mirror pulsed once, not as summons, but as acknowledgement. Elara touched the scarf around her wrist. The threads hummed back. She returned to the square. Most had gone to sleep. Enough remained. The bearded man dozed with his head on the busker's jacket. The teenager lay on his back and watched the stars with a face that had stopped pretending not to care. The woman with the scarf had her phone on silent and her courage on loud. Elara sat and let her spine remember trees. Memory and form settled beside her. The bowl reflected only the moon. "Will they come?" Elara asked, voice barely sound. "They already have," Memory said. Form smiled in his small, rare way. "But if you mean step through, that requires a host." Elara nodded slowly. "Then we keep setting tables." She closed her eyes and reached not up, but down, into the floor of the square, into the foundations of buildings, into the hidden echo rooms beneath train tracks where lonely people sit with headphones and pretend not to cry. She reached into the places where policy meets fatigue, where love meets logistics, where despair meets a kettle and decides for tonight to make tea. The lattice brightened, not like fireworks, but like bread rising. The mirror answered. It did not blaze. It did not thunder. It widened by a fraction no ruler could measure, the way a door widens when manners yield to welcome. A hand pressed from the other side, not a spectral novelty, but a hand with bone and music in it. The harpists, perhaps. Or perhaps it was every palm lifted when someone says, "I can help carry that." Elara didn't take it. Not yet. She stood instead, turned to the circle that had stayed, and bowed as one does before a choir about to sing. "Tomorrow," she said, and the word felt like warm water on cold wrists. "We teach the hospital a circle." "Tomorrow," Form agreed, already measuring corridors, waiting rooms, shift changes, the mathematics of compassion. "And tonight," Memory added, her voice the color of moss on old stone, "we keep the lamps low and the kettle full." The city exhaled, once, twice. Windows dimmed, not from despair, but from trust. Somewhere, a bus driver switched the radio from news to a song that knows how to hold a bridge. Elara glanced up at the hill. The mirror shone like a patient star. The hand waited, not impatient, not eternal, simply in time with 1,000 other hands opening on 1,000 other thresholds. "The fracture is not gone," Elara whispered, smiling so softly only the nearest stones heard. "But the remembering," the stones answered, as stones will when they have witnessed births and midnights and feet going home, "is louder." The wind carried it along the lattice to the clinic and the community center, and the alley where teenagers renamed themselves and meant it. It carried it into a boardroom where a budget met a conscience and lost, beautifully. It carried it through a screen into a room where a lonely person put down their phone and for 30 seconds just breathed. Above the hill, constellations leaned toward one another until the spaces between them felt like invitations instead of gaps. And beyond the mirror, the architects gathered, measuring not power, but welcome. They would step through soon, or she would. Either way, the table was set. The fracture was not gone. But the remembering was louder. To be continued in... Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of The Elders Part 4. Written and produced by Valkyrie 33-8.